Reverse abdominals is a quadruped exercise that we use to work on trunk stability. So depending on which variation, we've got trunk stability with lower extremity movement, in particular in hip flexion. We've got trunk stability while we have upper extremity movement and action, and then we've got trunk stability while we move the spine. So a lot of core and deep abdominal work, some spinal stabilizers, as well as hip flexors. Our springs for reverse abdominals are typically going to be one spring. So anywhere from like a blue up to a red, maybe with somebody who's really strong, you can work up to a green. And maybe there are times when a yellow is appropriate, especially if you've got anybody that's had kids, that's had a C-section, that's had any abdominal surgeries where we're really not wanting to overload the abdominal wall. Going on a lighter spring is going to be better. For our setup, we start in a quadruped position, which just means on your hands and knees, facing the back of the reformer. So you're going to climb onto the carriage, knees come up to the shoulder blocks, and hands come under the wrists. So we find our neutral spine in this quadruped, so we don't want to be in our anterior pelvic tilt or our flexed spine. We want to settle right in between those two positions. And then for this first variation, I'm going to move my knees slightly away from the shoulder blocks. So my knees are now behind my hips, right? This would be hips right on top of my knees. Now we've got the knees a little bit behind. This gives us somewhere to move. From here, without shifting my body weight forward and without changing my spinal alignment, I'm going to gently pull the carriage forward from the lower body just until the knees reach under the hips, and then gently release back out. We pull in and we release back out. Next variation is moving the upper body. So for this variation, we want to walk the hands slightly in front of the shoulders. You can choose to have the knees slightly behind the hips or directly under. And this time we pull from the upper body, dragging the carriage forward just a few inches while we keep the spine in neutral and release back. You can really get a lot of nice lat and tricep work here while we're having to stabilize the rest of the quadruped position. Our other variation here, which is one of my favorites, is adding spinal flexion into this movement. So this one you can, again, choose to start with those knees a little bit farther back or more under the hips. But this time we're going to use that spinal flexion to pull the carriage forward. So you start to tuck the tail, pulling up through the lower belly, and use that motion to pull the knees forward and then release back, coming back to your neutral spine. So this one's almost like a cat-cow, specifically the cat component of the cat-cow. And if you'd like, you can even move into that little extension at the bottom before coming back to neutral. Our last set of variations here are our oblique variations. So there's two ways that we can do obliques here. We can twist the lower body or we can twist the upper body. So for our upper body variation, I'm just simply bringing my opposite hand over to the opposite side of the frame. Outside hand faces out, inside hand faces in. We want to try to keep hips still facing directly back towards the foot bar. So I'm in a little bit of a side bend here. From there, you simply pass the carriage back towards your hip. So you're using the upper body and the arms to side bend the body farther, sliding your rib cage down towards the pelvis and coming into that oblique work here. We can do that on both sides. Our other oblique variation is twisting the lower half of the body. So from here, we leave both hands centered, walk the knees back a little bit, and twist them both over in one direction. So now our chest is centered, lower half is in a rotation. From there, we can work all the variations from before. So we can go neutral spine, pull the knees, we can pull the arms, and we could do our flex spine variation here as well. There are honestly a lot of common problems with reverse abdominals. The quadruped position already is one that we see people struggle with. Sometimes we're flipped in orientation with gravity, but in particular, because we're pulling with the carriage tension, people have a hard time sometimes figuring out where they're supposed to be pulling from. So one thing you'll notice when we're doing the lower extremity variation and supposed to be pulling with their knees is you really just get people pulling with the upper body, and they're not doing a whole lot with the lower body. So my favorite cue here is to imagine that you are lined up with a wall in front of your head, or there's a stack of books directly in front of your head. and you're trying to pull the carriage forward without shifting your body into the wall or the stack of the books. The other thing we'll see here with the knee pull variation is that people will pull way too far underneath them, almost like they're going to sit into a squat position, which just kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise because we're wanting to stabilize the trunk, right? So we're only pulling the knees as far as we can keep our neutral spine position here as we come in and out. When we come into our upper extremity pulls, one of the common problems we'll see is, again, people just pulling too far. So they'll pull so far that it tucks their rib cage down and underneath. So for that, we just want to cue working in a smaller range of motion, opening the collarbones wide as you drag the carriage forward and you release it back. One of the common problems we do also see with reverse abdominals is just that it is a lot of tension on the wrist. And one of my favorite modifications for that is putting the box on the carriage. So what we'll actually do is take the straps off of the shoulder blocks and then bring your box onto the frame just about halfway between the headrest and the frame. And this distance may need to change for the individual body. But from there, we can come down onto our knees and bring the forearms down onto the box. So now we've taken away all of that wrist tension, and we can do all of those variations here, even our oblique series and rotation. And to be honest, I teach this exercise more on the box now than I do in the normal quadruped position. It's just a little bit more comfortable. And I think when people aren't so focused on their wrists and their forearms, they're able to find a little bit more of the core connection. One last thing that we can do to add challenge to any of these variations, no matter what positioning you're in, is kicking one leg back so that we're in almost like a bird dog position and working with one side at a time.